Most people think they're stuck because they made the wrong choices. That's rarely true. They're stuck because they kept choosing what felt reasonable. And reasonable choices have consequences that only show up later. This is one of those realizations. Reasonable choices rarely feel risky. They're supported by logic. They make sense to other people. They're easy to explain. You don't have to defend them. That's why they're attractive. They don't create conflict. They don't disrupt stability. They simply allow life to keep moving forward without friction. The problem isn't that reasonable choices are wrong. It's that they don't ask what you actually want. They ask what fits, what's acceptable, what won't cause complications. Over time, you start prioritizing explanations over alignment. And alignment is quiet. It doesn't argue for itself, so it gets ignored. Once a reasonable choice is made, momentum takes over. One decision leads to another, each one easier than the last. Not because it's right, but because it's familiar. Momentum doesn't ask questions. It rewards consistency, not clarity. And clarity usually arrives after momentum has already carried you far. This is why nothing feels wrong for a long time. Life is functional, predictable, stable. You're not unhappy, just unengaged. Because disengagement isn't painful, you don't treat it as urgent. You assume interest will return on its own. But interest doesn't come back automatically. It fades quietly when it isn't invited. The realization comes when something interrupts the routine. A pause, a loss, a moment of stillness. You suddenly see the pattern clearly. Not one bad decision, but a long sequence of reasonable ones that slowly moved you away from what felt alive. That's when it makes sense. Why certain days feel empty. Why motivation doesn't respond. Why excitement feels distant. This realization is uncomfortable because it doesn't involve regret in the usual way. There's no obvious mistake. Everything was logical. That's what makes it hard to process. You realize you weren't careless, you were careful. And care without reflection can still lead you somewhere unintended. Being sensible protects you from immediate consequences, but it can distance you from long-term meaning, not dramatically, gradually. You don't lose direction all at once. You lose responsiveness. You stop reacting to what excites you because excitement feels impractical. That's when sensible choices start costing more than they give. Most people don't feel trapped by bad decisions. They feel constrained by the accumulation of sensible ones. That's why the realization comes late, because nothing ever felt wrong enough to question, until suddenly, everything feels quiet. If this makes sense now, it likely didn't before, and that doesn't mean you failed. Some realizations only arrive after life has been built carefully and correctly. They don't come to undo anything. They come to explain why something essential started feeling distant. Because now, at least, you can see how reasonable choices quietly shaped everything.